Question one you had was about the larger picture relationship between moral theories and epistemic theories. You asked, how similar are moral theories and notions and epistemic theories and notions, on the other hand? How similar are they? What are some places that they differ? Specifically, you asked, how good is the analogy between a right act and a justified belief? So Zagzebski draws this analogy between actions that are right and beliefs that are justified when she's talking about the relationship, and then she goes on to not like either of those accounts and go on to talk about virtues. But let's just talk about this right action, justified belief relationship. I actually think it's not a particularly apt one. You might think rightness is how we evaluate actions and justification is how we evaluate beliefs. But I don't think that's actually a good analogy because, and I'm gonna go from a particular point of view here, but it seems like right action the analogy in the belief case should be true belief. So for an action to be right, it depends what the circumstances on the ground are, not just what I believe or what it's like from my perspective, but what things are actually like, what my action actually does in the world. And for a belief to be true, again, true belief being true depends on the state of the world. Whether my belief is true or not depends on that state. On the other hand, it might look like justified belief relates to something we might call like justified action or reasonable action. So you might think, my belief is justified if from my perspective I'm doing the best I can. And my action is justified if from my perspective I'm acting the best way I can. And so that looks like a really tight connection, actually much tighter than right action and justified belief, as Zagzebski brings it out. I think these connections work very well if you're an internalist about justification, something, and so that'll make you think justification is sort of from the agent's point of view. First, the agent as an actor in the moral case, and the agent as a believer in the other case, and then the external condition on the externally good condition on an action we might call rightness. The externally good condition on a belief we might call truth. And so you might think there's a relationship between those. That, at least, I think is a somewhat natural way of thinking about it that some people think of. Probably more people think of that as the way to think about it than the way Zagzebski says. Now, there is at least one big difference I want to bring up between morality and epistemology, even if they're both normative theories, as Zagzebski's pointing out. Not everything works in exactly the same way. And in particular, one big difference is that we have what seems to be control or the ability to act in all sorts of ways. But it's not clear we have the ability to believe in all sorts of ways. In other words, or another way of thinking about this is, I can do some action. Maybe I can take a sip of water, or I could not take a sip of water. I have that choice. It's sort of voluntary whether I take the sip or not. But in the case of the belief that there's a glass of water on the table, it doesn't seem like I have sort of a choice or it's voluntary whether I'm going to have the belief that the glass is on the table or not. I'm going to have that belief because I'm looking at the glass right now. And so this is a point we've seen before about whether we have any control over our beliefs or whether they're voluntary. It looks like actions are voluntary to a much greater degree than beliefs are. And this might affect our normative theorizing. It relates actually to what we talked about in the previous video. If actions are voluntary but beliefs aren't, then the normative theories of these things, maybe they shouldn't be doing the same thing at all. We might just, when we think about beliefs, we might simply be evaluating them. Whereas when we think about actions, we might be prescribing certain actions or trying to get people to do certain actions or praise people for acting in certain ways or blaming people. Whereas if we don't have voluntary control over beliefs, it might not make sense to prescribe people to believe in certain ways or to blame or praise them for having certain beliefs because they may not have had control over that. So that looks like it could be a big difference, the amount of voluntariness there is in acting versus believing.